This is the world. If you've ever visited it, you'll see that to get around, you need to be on the ground, which is pretty much everywhere. The ground is made of rocks, which we call Earth, hence the name of our planet is Planet Earth. But a question that persisted until pretty recently, in the 19th century, was how were these rocks made? Was it made by water, or was it made by fire? And there seemed to be evidence for both sides. In this video, we'll see the answer to this question and how that answer held the secret to how our world was formed, where it's coming from, and where it's going. Every rock tells a story. To most people, a rock is just a rock. But to a geologist, a rock is a clue, full of valuable evidence that can be read clearly if you only know how. I often tell students that geology is like the TV series CSI. Geologists and paleontologists act as forensic detectives, piecing together subtle pieces of evidence to reconstruct a crime scene from the past, often in incredible detail. The eruption of a volcano can be a terrifying event. In ancient times, and even today in many different cultures, volcanoes were seen as the sign of the wrath of the gods, or a punishment for transgressing divine decrees. Their enormous power, noise, and potential for destruction made volcanoes more feared than any other geological event, except maybe earthquakes. The Romans thought that the fires of the Mount Etna in Sicily were due to the forges of the god of fire, Vulcan. He used the heat of the underworld to hammer out armor, metalwork, and weapons for the gods, including the thunderbolt thrown by Jupiter. When eruptions occurred, it was said that it was because Vulcan was angry. The Romans considered Mount Vesuvius on the Bay of Naples sacred to Hercules, and some scholars think the name Vesuvius is even derived from the Greek son of Zeus, which Hercules was. Yet one of the first truly scientific descriptions and insights into what a volcano is and how it erupts came from ancient times. In some sense, the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 CE can be considered the beginning of our modern understanding of Earth and the event that led to the birth of geology as a science. At the time, the towns around Mount Vesuvius were prosperous and growing. The Bay of Naples supported a large fishing industry, and wine grapes were grown in many places, including the slopes of Vesuvius itself. Then, as now, the volcanic soils around Vesuvius were too rich to be ignored, and they were valued for growing crops and vines of wine grapes. The Roman emperors had a large villa out on the nearby island of Capri, and many other powerful Romans had homes in this region. Pompeii was a large city with a population of over 20,000 people, and there were many smaller communities in this region as well. Vesuvius had not erupted since 217 BCE, so many Romans thought that it was extinct. By August of 79 CE, earthquakes had become much more frequent, and many of the wells and springs in the area had dried up. August 23rd was the Vulcanalia, the feast day of Vulcan, which the Romans celebrated every year. Ironically, the next day, Vulcan replied to his worshippers with a huge explosion that darkened the sky with ash and a rain of pumice rock that lasted 20 hours. Some of the people of Herculaneum and Pompeii evacuated immediately, but there were many left behind unwilling to leave or unable to do so because there were not enough boats in the harbor and the roads were clogged with traffic. Not only was it hard to escape, but it was even hard to breathe, with ash falling from the sky, choking the lungs of people and animals. But this was only a warm-up. A day later, Vesuvius spewed out many glowing clouds, or pyroclastic flows. These superheated mixtures of volcanic gases roared down the mountain at 100 miles an hour, incinerating everything in their path. They buried Herculaneum under tens of meters of volcanic deposits known as tuff. The eyewitnesses of the eruption mostly died or left no written records, so their thoughts have been lost to us in the mists of history. Fortunately, we do have one excellent eyewitness account written by the historian Pliny the Younger. He was 17 at the time, fleeing with his family in a boat to the town of Misenum. In a letter to his friend, the younger man described how his 56-year-old uncle, Pliny the Elder, one of Rome's leading admirals, scholars, and naturalists, decided to take a boat closer to the mountain to rescue his friends.
On the 24th of August, at noon, my mother drew his attention to a cloud of unusual size and appearance. He called for his shoes and climbed up to a place which would give him the best view of the phenomenon. Its general appearance can be best expressed as being like an umbrella pine, for it rose to a great height on a sort of trunk and then split off into branches. I imagine because it was thrust upwards by the first blast and then left unsupported as the pressure subsided. Sometimes it looked white, sometimes blotched and dirty.
The large surges of ash trapped ships in the harbor, so Pliny the Elder had no chance of escape. Eventually, boats returned to Pompeii and found Pliny dead on the docks, apparently asphyxiated by ash or volcanic dust. He was one of thousands of victims. Only a few of the original 20,000 people of Pompeii made it out alive. Pompeii was buried so deeply, almost 66 feet of ash, that the city was abandoned and eventually forgotten. It wasn't rediscovered until 1748, when diggers dug down and found the first traces of it in almost 1700 years. Since then, it has been completely excavated, giving us a remarkable window on life in the Roman Empire. Not only are the houses and natural objects well preserved, but the frescoes on the wall still have their original vibrant colors, and tiled mosaics are complete and undisturbed, and the artifacts, not made of flammable material, are surprisingly undamaged. Most striking was the discovery of empty cavities filled with air in the ash deposits. When these were filled with plaster and excavated, they turned out to be natural molds of the bodies of Romans who died in the ash, asphyxiated by the gases, curled up in a protective fetal position. Their bodies had been vaporized, but the cavities remained. After the eruption of 79 wiped Pompeii and Herculaneum from the map, and then later from the memory of the Romans, Vesuvius remained active for decades. There was a big eruption in 203 and again in 472. Then it went into a dormant phase until the 20th century, when an eruption in 1906 produced many large flows that killed over 100 people. It erupted again during World War II in 1944, destroying many villages, as well as an 88 B-25 Mitchell bomber that were involved in the Allied invasions of Italy. In the past 70 years, Vesuvius has been relatively quiet, but its history shows that it is still one of the most active and dangerous volcanoes on Earth. Nevertheless, there are more than 1 million people living on its slopes and more than 3 million around its base, so the next eruption will be far more deadly and disastrous if it's anything like the event of 79. The story of Vesuvius and Pompeii is not that different from the other great volcanic eruptions. But what sets it apart is the observation made by Pliny the Elder and his nephew of the eruption while it was in progress. Instead of treating the event as an act of divine vengeance, both men approached the eruption in a scientific fashion, eager to describe it as a natural phenomenon. This was consistent with the famous 37 volumes of natural history that Pliny the Elder wrote in his lifetime, one of the first such natural histories ever written. The description by Pliny the Younger of the plume of ash that resembled a pine tree and the subsequent stages of the volcanic eruption are the first detailed, scientifically accurate, non-mythological account of a volcanic eruption in history. Thus, the account of Pliny marks the beginning of naturalistic observations of Earth processes that we now call geology. Thanks for watching. If you like geology, here's a video about the natural history of New York City, and you can write in the comments below a topic you think I should cover next.